everybody. Welcome to our third workshop. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited to get started on this workshop. I think you all are going to enjoy our guest speaker this evening. I think gonna learn a lot. Our topic of our workshop this evening is on the topic of how do I prepare for a professional interview? So you're going into the interview, maybe you've gone to career fairs, maybe your mentors hooked you up and connected you with someone at their company. Maybe you've gotten some referrals somewhere else. Doesn't really matter. You are about to step into the interview. Maybe you've already had interviews before. This workshop is about how to think about interviews differently. We're bringing in guest speakers who are experts on this topic from around the world to give you insight and wisdom on how to make the most out of the professional interview. So this workshop is going to be about 45 minutes long with, and I encourage you to ask questions throughout the workshop. I'm going to ask you 3 questions during the workshop, which I'll have you answer. That's how you get credit for being here. You're now midway through the program so far. You should have already had your first conversation with your mentor. Hopefully you've already started setting up your second conversation with your mentor. If you have not, or you're struggling to get in touch with your mentor, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We need to take care of you so then you can get connected and make the most out of this program. So really, this program is all about how can you prepare for the first professional interview. Really, what you're selling your interviewer on is your ability, essentially your future potential opportunity. Essentially, you are selling them on your potential, because at the end of the day, people are not expecting you to come in and be the expert on XYZ topic. They are expecting you to be a willing learner and someone that's eager to gain knowledge and to be a better professional. If you can convey that, you will get the opportunity. But it will be competitive, especially in highly competitive industries. And I know that anybody that's in this program is more likely than not going into a career that's competitive. I mean, you would not have gotten a mentor had you not wanted to take your level, take your career, take your life to the next level. So with that said, I want to encourage you to keep your head up, keep applying, put yourself out there for more opportunities, and leverage the insight and knowledge that you're getting in these workshops to make yourself and to help you better prepare yourself for the interview. Now, before we get started into our main program, I want to ask you a quick question, and that question is, when it comes to the interview, how do you want people to feel about you? In other words, what feeling are you trying to convey about yourself when you are in an interview? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that, because I think if we are more intentional about how we want other people to feel about us in the interview, our likelihood of actually having that happen increases substantially. I mean, I've talked about in past workshops, strategy, story, state, which I will talk about in a moment, but this is a really big part of the story part. Like, what is the story that you're telling yourself? Now, I think sometimes we can interpret that as psyching ourselves up, getting ourselves confident, getting ourselves pumped for why we're going to be successful. And I think that's great. But I think if we could take it to another level, that being intentional about how we want other people to perceive us. So if we want them to perceive us as confident, or if we want them to perceive us as knowledgeable, or if we want them to perceive us as eager to learn and having potential, it could be a variety of things. But what I really want you to do is I really want you to identify feelings that you want other people to feel about you when you enter their world. Because you can be intentional about that. Your likelihood of having them actually feel that is much greater. But if you don't set the intention, you have no idea how they're going to feel about you. You've got really no control over it. But if you intentionally think to yourself, I want people to think of me as confident. Okay, what am I going to do that's going to convey convey confidence? Really, it's all about whatever that feeling you want to convey. Make sure that you are taking actions and being intentional about ensuring that other people view you that way, and that you come in trying to actively think about actions that you can take that will help other people perceive you in that light. So let's start under the next part of our workshop. Now, I've talked about this in the past before, and I've talked about this in previous workshops, but one of the big things that I always love to stress is the 3 keys to success in the program. There are 3 of them. That is your strategy, that is your story, that is your state. I bring it up every single time because it is that important. And the reason why it's important is because if we are not honing our strategy, honing our story, honing our state, we are not setting ourselves up for successful. If we let someone else drive our roadmap for us, we could end up in a location that we do not want to be. But if we are intentional about our story, if we're intentional about our strategy, if we're intentional about our state, we are much more likely to get to where we would like to go. It's kind of like the law of attraction. When we put it out there and we put it out to more people, when we're more intentional about what we want to accomplish, and we're more intentional about how we are going to convey our bodies and ourselves to other people, the likelihood that it comes back to us is much greater. So I want to talk about state. State is the most important thing. Like physically, where are you at in your life, in your world? What is going on? I don't care how stressed you are. I don't care how mad you are. I don't care how dejected you are. I don't care of anything negative going on in your world. If you can get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, especially for the interview, you will be successful. I'm a big proponent of power poses. I'm a big proponent of screaming at the top of your lungs and dancing out. In fact, I'd like to do that with you right now. So for the next 30 seconds, what I like you to do is I like you to stand up. I like you to shimmy it out. I like you to shake it out. I like you to scream at the top of your lungs. Just scream at the top of your lungs at the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. Yeah! Just let it out, let it loose, let it go, because you've got nothing to lose. I don't care if it's a popularity contest. I don't care if you're in a library. I don't care if you're in a house. What do you have to lose? This is not a coolness effort here. It's about making an impact and preparing yourself physically for being successful. What is the price of success? Getting yourself into a state conducive for being successful. Maybe looking a little weird to some of your colleagues, coworkers, or peers, but what is that cost to you in the long run? Nothing. They're gonna say, you know, hey, what were you doing? Why were you dancing? Why were you screaming at the top of your lungs? You say, hey, I'm getting myself in a state conducive for being successful. Maybe they've never heard about it before. Maybe they've never learned. You can educate them on this. So don't worry about how other people are perceiving you when you are going to get yourself into a state that's going to level up your game, especially when it comes to the interview. Now, you may not want to do this in the office of a business that you are about to interview in, but you could certainly do it in the bathroom, in a bathroom stall. Get yourself into a 2-minute power pose. Stand up like Superman or Superwoman, or put your arms out like as if you're a star. There's a lot of things that you can do to get yourself into a state conducive for being successful, but you should be doing something, because if you're not, you are letting the way that other people perceive you essentially come up to chance. And you don't want to chance it, especially for the opportunity of a lifetime. And you have no idea which opportunity is the opportunity of a lifetime. It may not be this job. It could be the next one. If you make a positive impression in an interview and you may not land that job, that interviewer could have really loved how you interviewed, and that person may not be at that company for forever, or they might be, and they might come up with a new job. They might reach out to you personally to have you come and interview. It's all about the relationship. It's all about how they perceive you. It's all about that impression you leave. Your state is critical. Now, what is the story you tell yourself for why you are going to be successful? This is something we kind of did earlier when I asked you, how do you want other people to feel about you in the interview? This is a great exercise to prepare yourself for a professional interview. If you are intentional about how you want other people to feel about you, you are going to put yourself into a position to succeed, because then you're much more likely to manifest that outcome. Literally, law of attraction, putting it out there. I want other people to feel XYZ about me. Confident, smart, intelligent, well prepared. I don't care what it is. Maybe it's a weakness that you have, but you like to have them perceive it as a strength. Maybe it's a strength that you have that you'd really like to amplify even as a greater strength. Doesn't matter, but set an intention of something. Because if you don't set an intention of something, it could be wild in terms of what they actually perceive of you. Now, the last key is your strategy. What are the things that you're going to do to make the most out of this interview? Are you going to come prepared with questions? Are you going to come prepared with doing background research on the company? Are you going to make an intentional, focused effort on taking notes during the conversation, so then you're asking poignant, direct questions to the interviewer that are relevant about his or her life? Are you going to do the things that you need to do to be the most successful in an interview, or are you not? So the strategies you're going to learn from our guest speaker later on in this workshop, I think you're going to really enjoy what our guest speaker has to say. But before we jump into our guest speaker, I want to talk about one final thing, and that is getting yourself into a routine that can help you prepare for an interview. One of the things that I like to do, have an accountability partner. This could be it could be anybody, but what you want to do with your accountability is you want to share with your accountability partner 3 things that you learned this week and 1 thing that you've done to get closer to that internship or job. What this does, and you might think this sounds silly, you might think this sounds crazy, it could be another student in the program, it could be a friend of yours, does not matter. But what we've learned, what we've observed is that students who land jobs and internships through this program are substantially more likely to actually land that job and internship if they told other people about their experience. One of the questions we ask at the end of the question is, on average, how many other people did you tell about your experience in the program? What we ended up learning was that when a student told 20 or more people about their experience in Ambition in Motion, their likelihood of also landing their job and internship was substantially higher than students who didn't. There's a direct correlation to you telling more people about your experience and what you're learning in this program to actually landing the outcomes you like than not. So I want to challenge you to identify an accountability partner. Share with them 3 things that you've learned this week and one thing that you've done to help you get closer to landing that job or internship. Now, the other big thing that I want to bring up with you is a referral program. So we are now starting to open up the applications and the signups for next fall. One, I'd love for you to be in part of the program again. You can get a new mentor, you're going to get new content, you're going to learn from new speakers, but more importantly, I want you to encourage other students to get involved as well. We have a referral program for you, so then you are discounted to get in the program next semester. Essentially, anytime that anybody applies, we ask them, how'd you hear about us? If they write in your name, you get credit. If you don't mind being an ambassador for this program and helping encourage other students to get involved and take advantage of this, I would greatly appreciate it because it would help us make a bigger impact on more people, which is really what our goal is. So let's jump into our workshop. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. I'm so excited to transition into this next part of the workshop. Remember to answer the 3 questions that we asked during the workshop. That's how you get credit for being here within 24 hours of the workshop going live. If you got any questions, any concerns, any issues with anything at all, please email support@ambition-in-motion.com. We will answer those questions, concerns, and issues. Thank you all for being here. I'm so excited for you to meet our guest speaker. Hey everybody, welcome to our workshop this evening. I'm so excited to dive in. We are in such a fascinating time period in our world where we've got COVID, we're trying to interview for jobs, we're trying to figure out how can we stand out from the crowd, how can we stand out from the pack. It is not an easy situation, but we've got an incredible guest speaker this evening. His name is Mike Johnson. Mike is a career strategist and coach and founder of Coach for Tomorrow. Mike is also a leadership coach and a Butler at Butler University, and was a sales and marketing executive at IBM for over 30 years. Mike has had some extensive experience interviewing candidates, being an interviewee for certain roles and positions. Mike has got a lot to teach, a lot to give, a lot to provide to you all as you work towards transitioning into this new career path that you're going to work towards and setting yourself apart, whether that be for the internship or for the job offer. He's got a lot of insight. He's got a lot of wisdom. I think you've got a lot to learn from him. Mike, thanks for being here.
Thanks so much, Gary. I'm looking forward to this. I appreciate it.
So we're here to talk about how can we set ourselves apart in the interview process. And I think this is a fascinating time period because it's COVID, meaning that we might be interviewing remotely, meaning that there might not be any in-person touch points through my entire onboarding process or just interview process. And as a student, I might be nervous. I might be questionable about what the heck is going to happen next. I'd love to learn just from your insights. Well, I guess maybe before we start into your insights, I'd love just if you could give a little bit more of a background on yourself. I know I went a brief overview, maybe share a little bit of your background, and then start sharing a couple of insights about how students can go about setting themselves apart in the interview process.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Yeah. Well, as you mentioned, I did a short 35 years with IBM, and then when I left IBM, you could say I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. So I went through my own career transition, experiencing many things you're experiencing now. Where am I going to go with this? What's my path? What focus do I want to have? And I end up really led into coaching. So I do career coaching, leadership coaching, and a lot of the experience we're talking about today and preparing comes, yes, from background in interviewing and doing different jobs and place to place in IBM, but also in working with a variety of individuals in this career search process. And there are a lot of things that we've learned that are effective, maybe some things that aren't so effective. So obviously we want to hone in those things that are more effective today.
So Mike, could you share with us just a little bit of some of the effective things that you've seen other applicants do to set themselves apart? Specifically, if you've ever worked with any college-age applicants, that's something that they've done to really kind of set themselves apart when maybe they didn't have too much experience on their resumes.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and there are some, regardless whether you're coming right out of college, you're coming out of grad school, or more experienced worker, there are some key tenets and key ideas that I want to leave behind. And there's preparing for the interview and researching the organization There's preparing yourself to be ready to tackle it when you're live, and planning your message. There are some things that you can do to represent yourself strongly that are more effective than this. We have this impression that we're there to be interrogated, and it's really more of a conversation than an interrogation. And if we enter it that way, and we're a little more comfortable in our skin and approach it that way, that tends to be more effective as well. And then there's some thoughts about closing out the discussion and following up.
So let's talk about preparing for the interview. What can we do to prepare for the interview itself? Let's say we've applied, we got our resume through, it got approved, and they said, hey, we want to interview you. What can we do to prepare for the interview to really set ourselves apart?
Well, first of all, research the organization. They for whatever got you that interview, and there's whole things, a whole separate discussion about that, but something got you in front of them, your resume, your application, a referral, and so that, but you may not know much about the organization or the company, so do some research. Look at their website, find out what they say about themselves. What does their LinkedIn page look like? What do other sources say about them? Glassdoor.com is a good example of some external perspectives and reviews of the company. Another key tool is, if you have a chance to have any sort of contact with somebody in the firm, get a referral, somebody who knows somebody there, or find them on LinkedIn and ask to connect and see if they'll spend 20 minutes with you on the phone just talking about themselves. We call those informational meetings, and those you can glean all sorts of insights about the company and the culture perspective. So research is really proving that the interview is much about them and honing into what they're about and their mission and what's important to them in the job, as it is about you and your opportunity to shine.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing it right, what you're saying is it's not just about them to interrogate me and then determine if they want to hire me. It's also about me doing a little of my own recon on them as well and asking them questions, but also coming prepared with research.
Yes.
I know, talking from my own perspective of hiring people at Ambition in Motion, I will sometimes lead off with the question of, so what do you know about us? What do you know about Ambition in Motion? Tell us a little bit more about what your understanding is of us, and I'd love to kind of fill in the gaps. And anytime I get a person who says, you know, to be honest, I haven't done really any research, it's like, okay, you could probably take a quick pause. You can do 5 minutes of research. We'll pick back up when you get back.
Yeah, it usually doesn't happen that way. and the interviewer tends to be more impressed with you when you ask a question about a goal or something you saw on the website or some scuttlebutt you heard. You know, I noticed this, or I've heard the vibe about this, or you said this. I was very curious to what your impression is about how the company is handling that.
Love that. I also love that you talked about the idea of reaching out to somebody on LinkedIn, potentially doing the role that you're applying for.
Right.
Yep. I know that we've talked about this in other workshops, and that's just, people are genuinely helpful. They want to help other people succeed. And what's interesting is when you can build a relationship with somebody at the company, you can get such a much better idea of what they're about, because the recruiter, their job is to entice you to work for the companies, right, to excite you and to attract you into the company. Whereas another person who's actually working the role, they may not care. They might be indifferent to whether or not you work at the company or not. And they might just give it to you straight and give you all the answers of what's good and what's bad and what's ugly and what's great.
Right, right. And you know, the other piece too is another role of the recruiter or the interviewer is to screen, is to weed out. They're working through a slate of candidates, and part of their job is to say who's the finalist and who's not. So there's a bit of both sides. Yes, they want to represent the best of the company, but they're also trying to figure out, is there, in this, I've talked to more people that are frustrated and shot themselves in the foot in an interview because of something they said, or they come across the wrong. Usually it's coming across the wrong way. But yeah. So another thing, some other things to do to prepare for the interview is probably the key one, especially in this day and age. There are some things to do in person, but let's assume that most of the initial interviews are going to be by technology, by Zoom or Skype or some sort of video. And so there's some things to do to naturally prepare for that. You know, we're both experienced at doing Zoom calls, but make sure you have a clear background. You don't have a lot of clutter behind you. I know somebody has a Beatles poster right behind. It's probably inappropriate for a job interview. And have lighting so they can see your face clearly. Some things like that. Dresses, you know, dress nicely from the polo shirt or a nice shirt. Some people say, hey, I want to present the best, so I'll wear a jacket and tie for guys or whatever. But, dress modestly but appropriately. The other piece, too, is probably one of the key things you can do to prepare is whatever got you into the mix, look at that job description. Think about what are the key things they're looking for. And then part of the homework is, okay, how do I meet those requirements? And it helps to do this in a two-column fashion. On the left side, put your requirement. The requirement, and it might be for so and such education, a bachelor's degree, maybe you're finishing a master's degree, or they're looking for associate, a bachelor, a bachelor, so many years experience, and maybe your internships have helped qualify that. Whatever those, and some other key requirements, technical requirements, knowledge bases, that kind of thing. So on the left side, put the requirements. On the right side, you put I offer. And so bullet for bullet, you're able to say, here's what you're looking for, here's how I meet that or exceed it. And so you do that preparation. Go ahead.
That's a great exercise to do. I think that's something that's really fascinating. I also find that I've seen it to be very helpful to have a partner with something like that, with an exercise like that. Sometimes what I've observed is when people are applying for a role or they're in the interview process, they can't see the forest from the trees. They're like, oh, I wonder if they'll be offended if I use like 8-point font and have no margins and just put everything on my resume. Or if I wonder, like, they freak out about the interview process because they're concerned, like, oh, they're going to want to know about this experience or that experience. I think that exercise of just looking at the description and then writing out what you got in terms of how that meets that is a great idea. But I think doing it with a friend or a colleague, somebody that knows your work ethic and capabilities, can kind of help you parse that through, because it can easily, I could imagine that would be very easy to get stressed out by something like that.
That's an excellent suggestion, Garrett. And do that with a buddy, a partner, brainstorm it, or have them review it. You do it by yourselves. So what do you think? And frankly, there's an effective use of that in a cover letter format. When you submit your resume, include that as a cover letter. Put a quick introduction. I'm formally applying for this position. Name the position. Here is a summary of my qualifications. I'm looking forward to adding value, kind of thing. And you have that 2-column list right in the middle of the page. And it's a very effective. HR people, you're doing their work for them. You're helping them figure out why you're a fit.
Wow, that's a really fascinating way. Let's take a moment to rewind that really quick. So I've never heard that idea, but I think it sounds fascinating, and I think it makes sense. So for the cover letter, lay out the description and how you meet that in a very could you just elaborate a little bit more on that? Because I think that's something that just that blew my mind a little bit. I've not heard that suggestion, but I think there's value in that. And I know that you've been in industry for so long. I'd be intrigued to tell me more.
Well, I'm with a group that came up with this approach and has been teaching and using for almost over 12 years now. And it's that notion of don't pick, if they have like 24 bullet points, don't put all 24 bullet points. You have a 3-page cover letter, that defeats the purpose. But in your judgment, in your critical thinking, what are those key 4, 5, 6 elements that are most critical? And maybe it's the ones that you meet the best. Well, so put those down in that 2-column format. And it helps you first of all say why I'm a fit for the job, and it'll resonate with somebody. Frankly, when you put it as a part of the resume attachment in an application, it helps you stand out in the screening process through screening software for profiles, looking for keywords, and it's kind of a subtle way of reemphasizing and using the keywords again from the cover of the resume. And I had a client this spring who said, within 1 week, the only thing I changed was adding a cover letter with this format, and I can tell when the screening software kicks me out the Dear John letter, the rejection letter. I'm sorry, but we don't meet the qualifications, or we went another route. And he said within every one of 5 job applications in 1 week, I used this new cover letter format. I forced myself to do it, and every one went through without the rejection.
Wow.
So it's effective.
Wow, that's a really powerful statistic there. That's crazy. So let me take a moment to ask the students a question really quickly. And I guess what I'd love to learn from your perspective, students, post in the comments section, what is your greatest concern when it comes to writing your cover letter? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about it. I think we all have concerns about cover letters and kind of how we can best do them. I think Mike gave a really great tip about how we can really set ourselves apart in the cover letter and not get kicked out by the resume reading automation software. But as a student, I think we all share these concerns. Let's throw them in the comments section. I think it's easy if we can learn about the concerns that other people are facing. We can learn how they're overcoming them, and then we can also challenge each other to realize, you know what, that shouldn't be a concern of ours because this is X, Y, and Z. Almost, I want to leverage our comment section to be a peer support area where everyone can kind of support each other and say, hey, I noticed you mentioned this is a concern of yours, but in reality, I've overcome this by X, Y, Z outcome. So post in the comment section. Would love to learn about that. So Mike, when it comes to the interview, what are other things that we can do to really make the most out of that?
So first is to know your message, and that the message is why. Reinforce the cover letter idea, review that, or if you haven't done that before and you've got an interview coming up, force yourself to do that as an exercise and say, why am I uniquely qualified, or why am I qualified to fit this role? And know that, have that in your mind. Then the other is just prepare, plan your message. And so you know that's a key point you want to make. Look for opportunities to reinforce that. But you're also going to have a lot of questions, so prepare for the ones you know they're going to ask. And obviously, there's hardly ever been an interview where we're not blindsided by some question that they ask, and I hadn't really thought of that, right? But things like, what are your strengths? What's your greatest weakness? Why did you leave your last job? Or maybe in a collegiate, maybe you don't have that. But what's your internship? What's your college job experience been like? Why do you want to work in this industry? Why do you want to work here? How do you get along with your previous manager, previous supervisor? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? The goal-oriented things. So those are things that they're going to ask. So you may as well prepare and have sort of a bulletized thought anchor to be able to say that. And then the one
I think preparing for those questions are great. One question that really stood out to me about really coming prepared for is the why do you want to work here question. I think that's a great question to prepare for. In my experience, a bad answer to that is something about yourself. And by that, I just mean, why do you want to work? Like, for example, I've met people that, that have applied for roles at Ambition in Motion. And I've asked them, so why do you want to work here? And sometimes I get the response of, well, I've done this role before. I think I could do it well. And yeah, I think that this could be a really good fit. That's a bad answer.
Mm-hmm.
We're a mentor program. So if you say something, well, why do I want to work here? I want to work here because I want to empower people to have mentoring relationships or anything about that. It's like, yes, great. That's a requirement. So I guess the key when it comes to why do you want to work at your company should be focused around their mission. What is their mission statement? Why do they do the work that they do? And if you can find that, you can align that. You can say, oh, wow, like they do X, Y, Z outcome. Say, I want to change the world. I want to impact people in this certain way or fashion. That is something that really stands out in terms of the why answer. At least that's my perspective. Do you agree?
I would, and that also reinforces researching the company and finding something you can hang your hat off. And if you ask them about that, why do you want to work there? Well, I'm fascinated by something I saw on the website, or here's what I see you doing. And I want to be a part of that. I'm just interested, that the notion of alignment. Are you aligned with what they're about? Yeah, no, very good point.
That's exactly it. And it's funny because when you say that reverse response, when you say that, well, I think I'd be a good fit for the role. I've done this type of role before, and I think that this would make sense for me. When you say that, all you're saying is like, what interests me about this role? Money. That's it. That's it. To have money and to maybe get my parents off my back that I don't have a job, like not anything about the company or the work itself. And that ultimately does not make you an attractive candidate.
Right, right. The other one that you can prepare for very well, and most people are scared of this, is the tell me about yourself question. That almost comes up almost every interview. They want to know a bit more about you. And the other thing, keep in mind this notion of interrogation versus conversation. It's sort of like dating, right? You don't plunge into marriage with somebody you've never met before. So you have a series of relationship. It builds as a relationship, and that's what's going on here. You work for people at the end of the day. Yeah, you're working for the company, which is frankly a piece of paper in the corporate headquarters with the legal document, but you're working for people. And so people are trying to get a sense for you as a person. And so it's that perspective of taking the relationship one step further. So keep that in mind and be open about a little bit about yourself. This is not the time for a 10-minute diatribe of everything you're doing. It's, have an outline. And what we recommend in the outline, things like, okay, I'm looking for this kind of position. I'm excited because I'm looking for a data or business analyst role. you're interviewing me for this business analyst role. I'm very passionate by this. Because some of your key strengths, you might say I'm analytical, I'm detail oriented, but I'm astute enough to focus on the big picture and keep the goal in mind. What are your key strengths? What do you look like when you're at your best, when you've done a project at your best? Pull those out. Just name a couple of them. If you have an example of, a project you've completed on time that was really knocked your socks off, you can use that. Most recently was, you have an internship that's related. And so I was working here and I saw these kinds of effects. If you have a couple of accomplishments. And then finally, future focus. What are some goals I have looking ahead? Because they may ask you about this, or you may lead with that on your own and say, I'm passionate about the opportunity to work here. I'm looking forward to developing and growing into potentially a management role, or whatever is maybe more technical, deeper technical role. So give them a little bit about you, not a lot, but just a little.
Yeah, no, there's a happy medium in terms of cadence about tell me about yourself. I've seen the one answer go for 15 minutes and you're like, okay, well, that's like half this interview. You're like, well, we don't have time to go through all these questions. I guess we're done now. Yeah, but at the same time, if you're too brief and you're not clear about who you are, I think it can leave a weird taste in somebody's mouth. I think a max should be around maybe 1 to 2 minutes when it comes to tell me about yourself. Keep it.
That's a very good point, Garrett. Yeah, our rule of thumb is about 90 seconds for any question you answer. There's the idea of net it, keep it brief, and make them ask for more. Not desperate. Well, don't you want sorry, I'm asking you a question, but you give them what they ask for. Tell them a little bit about yourself, and then they want to. If you said something that they're interested in, they'll poke at it more. Then go ahead and respond to that. But 90 seconds is a good rule of thumb because focus on them. And that's kind of the good part about video technology. We're able to see a little bit of the body language. It's not quite as effective as being in person, but you can get the perspective the person's eyes are glazing over, that I'm kind of rambling on, right? And that's a pretty good perspective to say stop that. And if you answer a question and there's a pause, don't be afraid of the pause. If it feels like it goes on too long, then you could say, have I answered your question for you?
I think that's a great piece. The pause, that's like a master art form of the interview process. If you can master the pause, that's something that you can really hang your hat on, because it's not an easy skill to develop. Right. It can feel uncomfortable to pause because you want to fill the silence, but silence can be beautiful. When you've answered a question, or when someone's asked you a question, you need some time to think about it. Showing that you're really deep and thoughtful about the answer doesn't show that you're not interested. In fact, it shows that you're really, really intentional about what you're about to say, and it drives people in.
Right, exactly. Yep. The other thing you can prepare for a bit is for what we call behavioral questions. They're going to ask some of these common questions we talked about, and heaven knows you'll be blindsided. I had a guy who was in the middle of the interview and asked, so tell me about a time that you broke a rule and why. I was completely caught in blindside. I don't break rules. I'm a stickler for the rules, right? So he had to think on his feet, and he finally said, well, there was a situation where here's like the rules, and I decided this was more like a guideline, and was this an exception that I needed to make, and why? And he said, and it worked out fine. But it was interesting. But the behavioral questions are, they can ask anything. Suppose you had a situation like this, hypothetically, what would you do? We can make up any answer that they want to hear because it fits the situation. But if they ask, give me an example of when, tell me about a time when, that's sort of a cue to say they're poking for some history. And the reason they're asking for history, not to put you on the spot, but to get a sense of how you're wired. How do you handle pressure, stress, conflict? And it might be, how's your relationship with your previous manager? Tell me about a time you had a conflict with another employee. How do you handle that? So there's some things that they're poking at to say, how are you really made? And be honest, be practicable, real. They say, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. Say, well, it generally doesn't happen, but that's okay because no one knows where the bodies are buried. And that's not a good answer.
Yeah, that's a great example of a good and a bad way to answer those questions. Let's talk about questions at the end of the interview. I think some students might be thinking to themselves like, well, I've done all this research. and I prepared for the interview, but I don't know if I've ever had the chance to showcase that I know or that I've done my research. How can I convey that? And I think one way you can do that is through the questions. Do you have
Yep.
some suggestions on types of questions that are beneficial to ask in an interview itself?
Absolutely. And this is part of the research too. Think of what you want to ask them. You mentioned the conversational thing. If all you're doing is responding to questions, you're like with the rest of the pack. But if you ask questions that are more intentional and thoughtful, or just even ask questions, ask some questions for you, you're going to stand out, likely. And so things like, what's behind the job description that maybe it's not there or that I should know about? Where do you see this job going in the long term? Are you replacing someone, or is this a net new job? Is it a brand new role? So there's some questions that you can kind of poke at a little bit, or apply the things that you learned from the website or whatever. If you haven't had a chance to ask that, there's a good time to ask that. So those kinds of questions about what their makeup, where their goals are for this thing, or maybe where do you see the first 6 months looking like in this job, or the first 90 days.
That's good. I like that advice. I think that makes a lot of sense. That makes me think of a question I'd love to ask the students. What is a go-to question you love to ask or would like to ask in your next interview? Post in the comments section. I'd love to learn about that. I'd love to learn about a go-to question that you use in the interview process. I think if we could all see what everyone else is saying, it can kind of maybe inspire us to ask a new or a different type of question, or a question in a different way. Post it in the comment section. So, Mike, what if we get the offer? Let's say we get the offer, we got a job offer in hand, and we're like, yes, we got it. But then we think to ourselves, well, shoot, we're waiting for another company to potentially offer us a role. What do we do? How do we handle that? How do we handle a job offer that we're still waiting for someone else to potentially make an offer to us for? And keep in mind, these are students, so they may get offers in October, November, December for May, and so they'll have a few months before they'll actually get started. So they'll have kind of this leeway period. What is your suggestion for how to handle that type of situation?
Well, there are a variety of of sites, websites that you can research salary ranges. For example, what's your starting salary range for an entry level in this variety of and job titles continue to be fluid. So know your range and get a perspective of that. And actually, as a student, when they make those kinds of offers, if you have some lead time, get the facts. What is their expected lead time? How much time do you have to decide? And those sort of things. Because I'm used to a more fast-paced environment where they're making an offer and they expect a decision within 48 hours. So it kind of depends what's the scenario behind that, and get some perspective on that. And then really look at, decide what's most important to you as what are criteria in terms of location, salary, lifestyle. There's just a variety of factors. I think what's most important to you, and think through how does this line up, this particular offer line up with that. And sometimes you may need to make a snap decision that says, I may wait for a better offer, or maybe I take this one because it lines up pretty well.
Let's talk about that for a moment. How do we determine our personal value system when it comes to our job and our career, and what we'd like to get out of, I guess, a career? I think as a student, we might just strictly look at the money and say, well, they're paying $5,000 more. They have a signing bonus that's a little bit higher, or a lot of these other, financial factors, which are quantifiable, sure. But maybe they're not fully taking into account the other factors that play into why or why not to accept a role. What are those factors, and how do you suggest people go about assessing what is the most important?
Well, it's funny you mention, I have actually developed a tool for this, and there are, but quickly you go through what are the most important factors, what are your criteria for working a place, just generic place, right? And decide ahead of time, rank that. How important are those to you? Scale of 1 to 10, let's say. So it might be size. How big of a company do you want to work for? What's the location? Are you open locations? It has to be close to home or close to college, and kind of keep that going. What about salary, of course? What about the scale? What about the size and the scope of the opportunity? Is there opportunity for growth long term? For special interest things that you really do well, your key strengths, your passion areas, does it let you tap into those? Nowadays, obviously working remotely, is that a factor? Almost everybody is now. What's their long-term plan? So some of those factors, and so just think through that. What's most important to you? What are your values? What's most critical? What are your criteria for working at a place? Work-life balance. Do they expect nose to the grindstone? What's their perspective on vacation time and flex time, that kind of thing. So a variety of factors. You can kind of think through those and decide ahead of time what's important, and then you can weigh what you're seeing with a given opportunity and how well it aligns.
Yeah. How do you suggest people go about identifying the answers to those non-immediately quantifiable questions like work-life balance, or whether or not I'll be able to work remotely, or the, I guess, ability to work on specific tasks that I'm really passionate about? Like, for example, I've seen roles where it's like a multi-dimensional role where you're going to be doing some of maybe marketing and then some of sales and maybe some HR stuff. I don't really know. Like, there's a combination of tasks that you're expected to do, and maybe you're really passionate about one of them, and they're like, yeah, you get to do some of that, but it's not very evident of what that breakdown of your time is going to be. How can we suss that out? How can we go about figuring out what our breakdown is going to be, and how can we put ourselves in the position to do the work that we want to do most?
Well, a couple of ways are to the informational meeting idea, find somebody that is doing that role in the company. Sometimes you get a chance during a panel interview in the interview process. And so ask, what's an average day like? What's an average week look like? What kinds of things you're doing? Also keep in mind, too, we're very passionate about our passion areas, but I had a very good friend who said, I've been doing what I love for years, but how much of every week am I doing what I really, really love? I'm doing a lot of administration stuff, and I'm doing this on my own. There's nobody else working for me. That's not, but there's a lot of things I got to do just to keep the doors open and the lights on, and I don't really like doing them. And every job is like that. So have some perspective, and some of that is you can never get a perfect answer. You don't know until you're in the job. But through the process, ask those questions. What's a typical day look like? What kind of key priorities do you see? How does that flesh out? And you can ask a question about work-life balance. Is this pretty much, I remember when I was interviewing for a job, the perspective was, hey, if you're working late in the project, we expect you in the office at 8:30 the next morning. That's just the expectation. So you can ask those kinds of questions to get a sense of it.
That's interesting. That makes a lot of sense to me. It does make me, it begs the question, beyond just assessing the role itself and assessing whether or not it's a fit, how can we, I guess, I'm almost even thinking, even before, I guess, the job is started, what can we do to kind of set ourselves apart? I mean, especially with this being a lot of students, where they might have months to go before they will actually start the role. What can we do to put ourselves in the best position to succeed? And how can we go about it so that our expectations be reality when we come into the job?
That's a great question, and there's a really good tool here that I think applies to this. It's how do you set yourself apart, get that sense of how all this fits together. And we dub it the 30, 60, 90-day plan. And for example, you ask things like, what's the first 60, 90 days in the job look like? What are the key priorities? Where do you see this going? And take all those notes as notes in the early interviews. So may say you have a screening interview and you're asking those questions, you're taking notes. The next time you interview somebody, and we're assuming you will be invited to the next round, write those down. And the idea is put together a quick synopsis on one page. What's the first 30 days kind of look like? And then, typically it's things like getting, knowing the organization of business, knowing my manager, knowing this key role, and knowing key stakeholders. But the next 30 days is the review stage. Know the stakeholders, the customers, who you're working for outside of your immediate thing, right? If you're customer focused, who are the key customers, internal, external customers, because everybody's a customer, right? And then 90 days is really the planning stage. Look to the future. You're able to start doing little projects and making some incremental results and deliver the results. And so you put that together on a page and adapt that to take that outline and shape key things. You're getting names, you're getting perspectives, and you write that down. And you come in the next interview with sharing that as a document. So here's a 30, 60, 90-day plan. Here's my take on this. I just put together as a straw man. Here's how I see myself maybe launching the job. I'd like your perspective on it. If you'd like, may I leave this with you? That will make
I
you
love that idea. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think this is something that students don't fully have grasped yet. And that's the fact that most jobs are not like cookie cutter, this is what you need to do. It's not like class anymore where it's like, hey, if you study this, you're going to get an A. And if you don't study this, you're not going to get an A. It's a lot of times very ambiguous where it's like, hey, I need you to do our marketing. Now, how you go about doing our marketing could be up to you. We just need to be able to drive leads and get leads from this. So if you're able to effectively do this, fantastic. But sometimes there's a lot of ambiguity. So having that 30, 60, 90 kind of layout is very valuable for students to prepare for the job. And even if it's rebuffed, maybe you send it in and they say, no, we don't really want you working on any of this. It doesn't make you look bad.
Right.
But if they don't have a plan for you, it shows that, okay, this is a good hire. This person is coming in with a plan of what they're going to do. They're not going to kind of just sit around all day and try to figure things out and be a wallflower.
Right.
They're coming in with a plan. So actually it makes me think, students, let me ask you a question real quick. What does your 30, 60, 90-day plan look like? Post in the comment section, really brief, like 30 dash, what do you want to have accomplished? 60 dash, what do you want to have accomplished? 90 dash, what do you want to have accomplished for your specific role that you're either applying for that you've already received? Post in the comment section. I'd love to learn about that.
Yeah, good thought. And it's a good exercise to kind of force yourself to think ahead of that, because we're looking for information in that early interview to help that and compile that for the later interview. And that is a huge differentiator. I know of at least 5 people off the top of my head who have said, I know that was a differentiator that got me the offer. And the other thing too is it helps you the third week in, as you're talking with your immediate supervisor, shape that, tweak it, change it. What do you think? Here's what I thought when we were in the interview process. Boy, I didn't know what I was talking about. Now I know X, Y, and Z, and A and B. So how do we shape this? How can I be effective? So you keep that sort of proactivity going. It will help you in the long run in a lot of ways, not just through the interview process.
I like that.
There are a couple of other tools I do want to make sure we hit, and one is as the interview is drawing to a close, they may give you, hey, appreciate the time together, whatever. Make sure you ask the next step question. What's our next step? Because so often we come out and what's the next step? I have no idea. They'll call me. And especially now, this is not the time to just walk out the door and assume they'll call you, because the chances are they won't. So you ask 3 things in that next step. What are the next steps? Plural. What's the time frame you expect on this? What's your kind of time frame? You ask, what's your time frame? That's an open-ended question. Open-ended questions are great versus like giving the binary yes or no answer. And then you ask, who's the best contact point? Now, in the early interview, it's pretty obvious it's the HR screener, or it's maybe the hiring manager, the executive interview, but you might be in a panel discussion. So it's very appropriate to ask, who's my most appropriate contact point? So if they tell you we're working through candidates, we expect to have a list in the next week or so, we'll let you know in a week, 10 days. And if 11 days go by, it doesn't feel weird to go approach them and make sure you know your contact point and checking in. Really had a good experience, wanted to follow up. This was sort of the time frame I'd been recommended. Well, where do we stand? Do you need more information from me? That kind of thing. Make it casual, but make it intentional.
I like it. That's awesome. Mike, any other final points you want to impart on our students to end this workshop about how to prepare for the interview?
I'll say one more closing comment in terms of following up is always follow up. They may give you an assignment. There may be some things the information, maybe they need transcripts and you didn't think to bring transcripts, or it's Zoom and they didn't get sent, or they didn't tell you the requirement, or maybe they want references. Make sure you follow up within a day immediately with whatever they need. And if it's longer, make sure they know you're working on it and we'll get the information to them as soon as possible. The other key thing, and this is so much a differentiator, is, especially with Zoom, find an external address for the person, get their name, title. You typically exchange business cards. Well, get that. Hopefully you'll have that on their email signature. Send them a handwritten thank you note. Just a quick note saying, I really appreciate our opportunity to talk. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity to work further with you. That's all you need. because especially that nobody does that anymore. So the fact they get a handwritten note from you will immediately pull you to the top of the pack. You stand out. And you want to stand out in a positive way, not in a negative way. So
you are so right. I know that I've done that before, and that's landed me jobs and internships. It's huge. If you are on the chopping block of the final maybe few candidates they're considering for the role, a handwritten thank you is going to push you over the top.
Yes, absolutely.
And if you're not in that top few, a handwritten thank you could push you into the top few of like, okay, we'll take them in for a second round, even though we weren't planning on doing it. It could be a huge game changer. The only time I've ever seen a handwritten note not work out is when, for whatever reason, you just didn't fit what they were looking for, and they were like, this isn't going to be it.
Yep.
Even if, no matter what you did, you could have sent us all of King Tut's gold. We would not have hired you for this role. It doesn't matter if you sent us a handwritten thank you note.
Exactly.
But beyond that, a handwritten thank you note really can take up. If you're in the middle of the pack, can push you to the top. If you're in the top of the pack, can push you to the offer, and it never hurts.
The other final thing I'll relieve with, a very practical tool, and this really helps with Zoom, especially with online or even phone interviews. Have all your information laid out. Have your resume in front of you. If you've made whatever notes you've made about questions you want to ask, have that written in front of you. Because it's not clear that you're looking down for a minute and scanning over your notes. So it's kind of a cool advantage to technology versus being face-to-face. Often when we do face-to-face interviews, I recommend a leatherette binder, 3-ring binder, I call it portfolio. Have your copies of your resume, have extra pens, have business cards, have, a bunch of, have your thank you cards, stash of those ready with stamps. Look through reference list, have your reference list available, have like bio information, maybe project work you've done, examples of that, have your LinkedIn profile, develop a LinkedIn profile, make sure you have that ready, because it's just, again, a way to introduce yourself a little bit more. And the reason that this 3-ring idea makes sense is you can quickly flip to a tab in the section, pause, where was that note in the project? I want to be specific about that specific quantified result we achieved. You can go right to it and reference it. So have a pad of paper to take notes. So it's just a way to organize yourself. If you're doing a technology interview, it just keeps you organized. When you're doing an in-person interview, and sooner or later you will be doing an in-person interview or convinced, it shows how prepared and organized you are. And that, again, helps you stand out over somebody who's just kind of sitting there and crossing their arms and taking notes. The other couple of tips is, and this is kind of a technology note, is lean forward, lean into the discussion. Don't kind of sit back and just hang out. The whole body language, communicate energy and interest, and kind of hang on every word. And smile, because it's amazing. Obviously, in a smile, it just lightens up your face. And even over the phone, a smile comes through the phone if it's a phone interview.
So true. Mike, this has been great. This has been really lots of wisdom, lots of insight. I appreciate you sharing this. Final question, how can our audience find you? How can our audience learn more about you? How can they connect with you? How can they learn more about your work?
Well, my website is Coach for Tomorrow. It's www.coachfortomorrow, all spelled out, .com. I've been doing this for several years, and again, I work with clients from collegiate age all the way through mid to late career. So happy to answer questions. You can schedule time via the contact page on the website, and we can connect that way.
Yeah, and by the way, how about LinkedIn? I know that all of our students are very active on LinkedIn. Can they connect with you on LinkedIn as well?
Absolutely, they can. Encourage that. It's Mike Johnson, MJ. That's Mike Johnson is such a common name, so it's Mike Johnson followed by my initials, MJ at AOL on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Awesome, Mike. This has been great. Thanks so much for being here. Everybody, thank you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. See you for our next workshop.
And all the best to all of you in interviewing.